Afternoon guys, I've finally bought my new camera. So I've got this mirrorless camera body here. For anybody that's been following my channel for the last few weeks or possibly months even, you'll know that I've been thinking about switching to a mirrorless camera body for wildlife photography. And I looked at so many different makes and models, but in the end I decided to stick with Nikon because I've got loads of Nikon glass, including this 600mm prime lens. And then it was just a case of deciding whether to go for the Z6II or the Z6II. And I picked the Z6II because it's got great low noise performance, a few more frames per second, and it just felt the right one. And I got it yesterday, so I've been out this morning and I've literally had this camera in the hand for about 2 hours. So I thought I'll give you my quick feelings and thoughts on the Nikon Z6II. Yeah, it's been really good actually. So the actual feel of the camera body is brilliant. It's got a lovely grip, feels really good in the hand. For anyone that's already a Nikon user, it's laid out almost the same as a Nikon DSLR. So the buttons are in the same places, the menus are the same, and Nikon has always, in my opinion anyway, Nikon has always been well laid out. So it took me literally, I don't know, a minute to get used to this camera. All the buttons and all the menus are basically the same. So that's great. And then what I've been doing this morning is just having a really good go and practice with all the different autofocus modes, because I'm doing wildlife photography primarily with this body, so I want to know that the AF is as good as my D500. And you know, my initial thoughts are, yeah, it's really good. It's as good as my D500, if not better. So I'm using the F to Z adapter, or depending on where you live, the F to Z adapter. So that means I can use my F mount lenses on my new Z mount camera, and the autofocus has been good. So this morning I was using my 200 to 500mm zoom with the adapter in good light and bad light. When I first started out this morning, it was really cloudy, so it was a good test to have, you know, practice with this camera in really dull conditions and bright conditions. And I found that the autofocus has been very good. It's locked on, it's been very consistent, very fast, and I've really got no complaints actually. So I tried a few different focusing modes. Obviously single AF, where you're using a single point and keeping it on the animal. Dynamic AF, where I'm using a little group, which is what I normally use with my DSLRs when I'm doing birds in flight. So you've got 5 AF points, so it gives you a little bit more flexibility if you don't quite get the middle point on the bird's head. And then I tried some other ones actually. So I've got I tried auto area, where the camera's going to decide what to focus on, and that was okay. But I felt that, especially if you've got 2 or 3, like I photographed 2 or 3 ducks together, and it couldn't really decide on which animal always to focus on. And that's not the camera's fault, there's multiple subjects there. And then I looked at auto area large for animals, and that was really good, because what you get with that is you get a little box, and you put the box, well, it's a sort of a medium-sized box, I would say, and you put the box over the animal or the subject you want to photograph, and it narrows down the choices for the camera, so it just concentrates on anything that's in that box, and that worked really well. And that's a mode I think I'm going to be using a lot more. You've obviously got the same for people, but in this case I'm concerned about wildlife photography, so it's the wildlife one that I was most interested in. And yeah, it's very, very good. I've got birds in flight using that mode. I've got ducks coming in, black-headed gulls. So all the pictures I took this morning were not that great. I mean, I was looking down on the animal sometimes, but it was just to practice and get used to this camera, and in particular to get used to the autofocus system. So my first impressions so far is really, really positive. So I'm really looking forward to getting to grips with this camera. I can't say obviously for definite with regard to image quality, because I need to get these pictures home onto the computer and look at them on a big screen. And what I'll do is I'll do that, and then I'll come back to you and in this video and let you know what I think. But so far the autofocus with the 200 to 500mm zoom lens and the adapter worked really well. and it should be even better with the prime lens, and that's what I'm going to use this afternoon. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to test out the autofocus and see what I can find. So this morning I was at an old a reservoir close to me because I knew there'd be, you know, quite a few birds there. As I say, very poor compositions because I'm looking down on the animals, but I was just getting some practice in. Today I'm on some salt marshes. I've got salt marshes over there and farmland here, so probably not so much in the way of subjects. There won't be so many animals around, but you know, that's okay. I've already got a good test in, and I'll see what I can find this afternoon. So yeah, very positive so far. First impressions of my Z6 Mark II, very positive. When it comes to low light performance, that should be really good because it's a full frame sensor, 24 million pixels, so low, and Nikon is always good for noise control anyway, but that's something I want to test out either today or certainly in the near future. And image quality, obviously that should be good because we've got a full frame sensor here. It should have a really good dynamic range as well, so they're all things that I need to look at over a period of time really. But this is just a quick first impressions for the Nikon Z6 Mark II, and in particular about the autofocus system, because there's a lot talked about the autofocus for Nikon mirrorless cameras, and at the moment it's looking really good. So I'll say bye for now guys, and I will speak to you soon. This was one of the first pictures I took, and as you can see the composition isn't great, but I mentioned earlier this was just about learning to use my new camera, you know, learning about the menus and the functions, and in particular the autofocus performance. And I used a variety of different modes, from single AF, where you're using a single point, to dynamic AF, and in the case of my Nikon D500 I can use a small group of 5 autofocus points. With the Z6II it's a group of 9, which I prefer it to be 5 because I think that's a little bit more accurate, but nevertheless it seemed to work okay. I also used auto area AF for animals and wide area L for animals, and in this shot this was the wide area L for animals, and it worked really well. And this is the one where you can put a fairly large box and place it, move it around the viewfinder and place it on the area where you want the autofocus to concentrate on. So in this case obviously the duck's head, and it worked really well. And on this next picture I'm cropped right in, and you can see that the autofocus has worked brilliantly. The head is sharp, the eye is sharp, and it's all good. Incidentally, none of the pictures in this video have been sharpened or had anything done to them other than converting the raw file, where I've adjusted the tonal range slightly and the colour saturation slightly, but I've not sharpened post-production any of these pictures, and I think it's better that way because we want to see, you know, what's coming straight out the camera. In this picture of a male mallard, I'm using dynamic AF. So in the case of the Z6II, that's 9 AF points, and I've placed the centre AF point on the duck's head. And as you can see, it's focused really well and it's sharp. And when we zoom in, you can see there's really good sharpness on the eye. Now, both of these ducks are not moving around. They're moving a little bit. Obviously, they're moving their heads around and that, but it's not fast moving action. So what we need to do is move on to some moving subjects and test out the autofocus on those. But so far, so good. This female mallard is having a bath, so we've got some action. Now, it's nowhere near as challenging for the autofocus system as a erratic bird in flight, but we've got movement here, so it's a good step on our test of the autofocus performance. And in this case I was using the wide area large for animals, and you can see, you know, it's really sharp. It's locked onto the animal's head, and we've got really good autofocus performance. And when we zoom in, you can see it's a very good sharp picture. So again, the camera's passing all the tests so far. Now, I'm not going to say that every picture I took for this first morning's photography was sharp, far from it. You know, with wildlife photography, you've got fast moving subjects that are moving in different directions. You're using long lenses, so there's a possibility of camera shake. So there's no way that every picture is going to be sharp, and that was the case with my D500. So as long as I'm getting as many keepers with the Z6II as I did with my D500, then I'm happy. And so far it looks as if that is happening. In this image we've got a black-headed gull in flight, and that's a good test for the autofocus system of any camera. And I took this picture under soft lighting conditions, so the sun was behind a cloud at the time, so that makes it doubly hard for the AF system of any camera. And as you can see, the picture looks sharp. Now it won't look as sharp as if I shot this picture under sunny conditions, because the light is more contrasty and it makes the picture look sharper. But the fact of the matter is, this image is in focus. The camera's nailed, the autofocus system on my camera has nailed the focus, and when we crop in tight, if you look at this next shot, you can see it is sharp. The beak's sharp, the head's sharp, so that's great. I think, you know, it's a really good test for the Z6 Mark II. Very pleased so far. And I used the wide area large for animals on this, and it's worked really good. So I made sure the box was over the animal's head, and it, as I say, it narrows down the thinking for the camera, and I think it helps to speed up the autofocus. And all these pictures so far were shot using my 200 to 500mm Nikon zoom lens. Well, hi guys, this is the second day out with my new camera, the Nikon Z6 Mark II, and first impressions. And again, it's very favourable. So yesterday I used it mainly with the 200 to 500mm zoom all morning. Then in the afternoon I switched to the 600 prime to see how that got on. But there wasn't a lot of wildlife around in the afternoon. So I've come back to a local lake because, again, I'm not really worried about what I photograph. I'm just testing out the camera. And I've got ducks and geese. There are great crested grebes here as well, but I haven't seen any of those yet. Swans, so nothing spectacular, but lots of wildlife. So there's lots of opportunity to practice. And I'm practicing with all the autofocus modes and just getting used to the camera. And the autofocus with the prime obviously is going to be good. If it was good with the 200 to 500mm zoom, it's going to be good with the prime, and it's doing really well. And then a couple of other sort of observations. The electronic viewfinder is superb. The EVF, it's like, if you didn't know, it's like looking through an optical viewfinder. It's really clear, it's really, really crisp, so that's fantastic. Now, the only thing with the EVF on this, when you're using continuous shutter release, so you're going bang, 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 taking lots of pictures, there is a bit of a blackout between frames. So that's something you have to get used to. So I'm not going to lie, there is definitely a blackout. And it does make it slightly more awkward when you're tracking a moving bird. But to be honest, if you do it in short bursts, I've not found that to be too big a problem. I'm just going to need to slightly adapt the way I shoot to take into account the blackout for when I'm tracking a fast moving subject. But aside from that, it's all positive. The video's looking good as well. The autofocus on the video seems to be working really well. And again, this is all just first impressions. What I will do is, in a couple of months' time, when I've really got to grips with, you know, everything on this camera, I will do a much more in-depth review of it. But to cut a long story short, the autofocus for both stills and video looks good. The video is working really well. The EVF is great, although you do get a little blackout between shots. The handling of the camera is fantastic, so it's all good. And I'm hoping that I might get the great crested grebes this morning. But as I say, this isn't a go out and shoot great wildlife pictures day. This is testing out my new camera body and just giving you a quick first impressions of what I think of the Z6 Mark II. Now, at the end of this video, I will give you a summary of everything that I've found out about this camera body so far, but I've only used it for probably 3 or 4 hours, so that's not long. But I'm taking good pictures already, so that's got to be a really positive thing, hasn't it? So my switch to mirrorless, I've still got my digital DLSRs, my digital SLRs, so, and I'm not going to get rid of those, but the way it's looking, this is going to be a main camera body for me for wildlife photography and wildlife filming. So yeah, I'll speak to you soon, guys. This is one of the first pictures I took at the lakeside, and it's a Canada goose just swimming past. So again, not the fastest moving animal, but as you can see, it's very sharp, and I believe I used dynamic AF on this shot. And when we zoom into the head, you can see it's pin sharp on the face and on the eye, which is exactly what we want for a wildlife picture. So again, autofocus is working well. The light's bright, but not super sunny, so very soft overcast in this case. So you know, it's all right for the conditions for the autofocus to be working in. while I was sitting by the lakeside, just waiting for different animals to swim past, a heron flew over, and that was really great because it meant I had to react quickly. I saw it out the corner of my eye, so I swung the lens up and photographed the heron. And as you can see in this first picture, the autofocus is locked on well. Now I took probably about a dozen pictures, and I would say 6 or 7 out of the dozen, maybe 6, yeah, probably, were sharp, and the other half were slightly out of focus. So 50% hit rate, or slightly more than 50% perhaps. I think that's okay. And as we zoom in to this shot, you can see, the eye's sharp, and that's a small part of the frame. So not only is the autofocus working well, the actual image quality is good. And on this second shot of the heron, we've got a more complex background, so trees in the background. So again, it's locked onto the bird. It's not been confused by the background, and as we zoom in, you can see it's dead sharp on the eye. So I'm really pleased that this heron flew past, because I had to react quickly, and so did the camera. So all good. With these images of the black-headed gull, I was ready. It's not like the heron shot where I had to react quickly because it was just a fly past. I could pick out the animal I wanted to photograph, so it made it a bit easier for me and the camera. But you can see, again, the sharpness is good, the autofocus is good. I think on one of the pictures I used dynamic AF, and on the other shot I used the wide area L for animals, and they've both worked equally well actually. So yeah, I'm pleased with the autofocus performance through a whole range of situations actually, in good light, in poor light, in between light. I've used different AF modes. Single AF works fine as well, but you're generally going to use a single AF for a really static animal or a static subject. I tend to use when I was shooting with digital SLRs, the dynamic AF most of the time for moving animals. So in this case, with the new camera, it's really a little bit more practice, and I'll decide on whether it's a dynamic AF or the sort of wide area L for animals, which function works the best actually. We'll see. I wanted to have a quick word about image quality, and again, this is a real first impression. I've only been using the camera for a couple of hours, but if you look at this picture of a little egret, it's up in the trees perching, and it's really small in the frame. I mean, it's taking up what, about a 30th of the frame, maybe even a bit less than that. Now if we zoom in really tight on the head, the actual image detail is really good. Now look, it's not pin sharp, but if you look at the eye, that's a tiny part of the frame, a few pixels worth of information, and yet there's good image quality there. And with a little bit of sharpening, that would it'd look as if it's got even more clarity. So the image quality on this 24 million megapixel camera is looking great actually, so I think it's more than enough for my needs. Last but not least, we had this mute swan flying, and again it was a great chance to test the autofocus, because I saw it flying in from the left. I swung the camera around really quickly and took around about 7 or 8 shots, and at least half of those shots were sharp. Yeah, I'd say probably about a 50% success rate, and I think that's about on par with my D500, and I'm happy enough with that. And the other thing I found as well is I thought I'd overexposed this picture because it looked a bit bright when I reviewed it on the back of the screen. I was shooting in manual exposure, and I just didn't have time to quickly change the exposure. But when I got the picture home, or the pictures home, downloaded them and looked at the raw file, in actual fact there was detail in the highlights as well as the shadow. So that was very good actually. It means we've got a very good dynamic range on this sensor. I thought I might have lost some detail in the highlight areas, because when you view a picture on the back of the screen, you're looking at a JPEG representation of that picture, and if you're shooting in RAW, you've got a little bit more dynamic range. So in other words, a bit more detail in the highlights and the shadows, and the dynamic range of this camera is great. I don't know if it's better than the D500 because I haven't done any tests yet, but I think that's something I will do in the future when I do sort of a really long-term sort of test on this camera. But to round up, the dynamic range is good on this camera, the autofocus performance is good, the image quality is good, the handling is good, the layout is good, the grip, it feels really comfortable in the hand. So all in all, I'm really pleased with my first impressions of my Z6II, my Nikon Z6 Mark II. Really pleased, but it's early days. I'd also just quickly like to say that I've bought this camera myself. I'm not getting paid by anyone to give a review, and this is not really a review, it's just first impressions on my new camera, but it's favourable first impressions. Now I'm not going to say that there's things that are not going to be annoying. The blackout between pictures is annoying, and that is something I'd like Nikon to fix. But having said that, you know, this is what you'd probably class as the mid-range body. The Canon R5 is £3,500. The Sony A1 is £6,000 or so. The Nikon Z6II is £2,000. There is, you have to be realistic. Now, £2,000 is a lot of money for a camera, but we're not talking about absolute pro spec camera body here. We're talking about a mid-range, probably mirrorless body. So far, in conclusion to my first impressions, I'm really pleased with this camera body, yeah, I think I'm going to enjoy using it over the long term. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful, and if you have enjoyed it, if you can give it a like, that would be great. Always helps my channel. If you have got any comments on Nikon kit, Nikon camera equipment, or any camera equipment, or anything photography related or wildlife photography related, that just drop them in the comments section below. That would be great. And last but not least, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, if you've enjoyed this video or any of my other videos, if you can consider subscribing, that would be great. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll speak to you on the next one.